The message came at dawn on Tuesday morning when most of Earth was still sleeping. Commander. Jake Martinez was drinking his morning coffee aboard the orbital station New Geneva when the quantum transmission burst through their communication array with enough force to shake the entire structure. The signal carried the official seal of the Zephyrian Empire, a coalition of 12 alien species that ruled most of the known galaxy with technology so advanced that humans could barely understand how it worked. Jake had been expecting this message for weeks, ever since Admiral Lisa Parker and her diplomatic team had gone silent during their mission to the galactic core. The transmission was brief and carried Lisa's voice, though it sounded strained and tired in a way Jake had never heard before. She spoke slowly and clearly, knowing that every word would be analyzed by Earth's leadership within the hour. The Zephyrian ultimatum was simple and brutal. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender unconditionally, or face complete destruction. The terms of surrender were worse than anything Jake could have imagined. Humans would have to give up all their technology and submit to genetic changes that would make them less intelligent and less aggressive. 10 million people would be taken from Earth every year to work as slaves on alien worlds. The rest of humanity would be moved to small reservation planets where they could live, but never advance beyond basic farming and simple crafts. The aliens had been watching Earth for decades, studying human behavior and technology. They had decided that humans were too dangerous to exist as a free species. Humans developed technology too quickly and were too unpredictable in their thinking. The Empire's leader, a being called Vextar the Eternal, had declared that humanity must be controlled before they became a threat to galactic peace. Jake immediately called an emergency meeting with Earth's military and political leaders. Within 2 hours, President Kate Sullivan was sitting in the command center of New Geneva, along with Captain Ben Rogers, the military's top strategist, and Dr. Amy Watson, Earth's leading expert on alien technology. The room was filled with tension as they watched the alien message replay on the main screen. Dr. Watson had spent years studying the few pieces of Zephyrian technology that Earth had managed to acquire through trade and salvage operations. Her analysis was grim but honest. The aliens had faster-than-light travel that worked on principles humans barely understood. They could convert matter into energy and back again at will. Their weapons could crack planets in half, and their shields could stop almost any attack humans could mount. The gap between human and alien technology was like comparing a stone axe to a nuclear missile. Earth's entire military consisted of 300 ships, most of them converted cargo vessels with weapons bolted onto their hulls. The Zephyrian Empire commanded fleets of thousands of ships, each one more powerful than anything humans had ever built. Captain Rogers spread out tactical displays showing Earth's defenses. The orbital platforms around Earth and Mars could maybe stop a small raid, but they would be useless against a full Zephyrian assault. The asteroid belt mining stations had some defensive weapons, but nothing that could seriously damage alien technology. Humanity's colonies on the outer planets were completely defenseless. The debate that followed was short but intense. Some council members argued for surrender, pointing out that even slavery was better than extinction. Others wanted to fight despite the odds, saying that freedom was worth dying for. Dr. Watson tried to find middle ground, suggesting that humanity might be able to negotiate better terms if they showed they had some useful technology to offer. President Sullivan listened to all the arguments without saying much. She was a former military officer who had fought in the Mars Independence War 20 years earlier. She understood both the value of strategic thinking and the importance of standing up for principles even when the odds were bad. When the debate finally ended, she stood up and looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. Her decision was clear and final. Humanity would not surrender. They would not accept slavery or genetic modification, or the destruction of everything they had built. If the Zephyrian Empire wanted to destroy humanity, they would have to fight for it. Earth would resist with everything they had, no matter how hopeless it seemed. The announcement went out to every human settlement in the solar system within the hour. President Sullivan's speech was broadcast live to all the colonies and ships, reaching nearly 12 billion people scattered across dozens of worlds and space stations. Her words were simple and direct, speaking to something deep in the human spirit that refused to bow down, even in the face of impossible odds. She told them that humanity had always faced challenges that seemed too big to overcome. Their ancestors had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that seemed like the end of the world. They had learned to fly and to travel between stars and to build cities in space. Each time they had succeeded not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they refused to give up when things looked hopeless. The response from the colonies was immediate and overwhelming. Messages poured in from every human settlement expressing support for the decision to fight. Mining crews in the asteroid belt volunteered to convert their equipment into weapons. Scientists on Europa offered to work around the clock developing new technologies. Even children sent drawings and messages of support to the soldiers who would soon be fighting for humanity's survival. Jake Martinez found himself appointed as Earth's military coordinator, responsible for organizing humanity's defense against an enemy that outgunned them by thousands to one. As he looked out at the stars from the observation deck of New Geneva, he knew that the next few days would determine whether humanity survived as a free species or disappeared forever into the vast darkness of space. The Zephyrian Empire had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. Instead, humanity had chosen to fight. The war for Earth's freedom was about to begin, and nobody knew how it would end. But one thing was certain: humans would face their fate on their own terms, standing up for the principles that made them who they were, no matter what the cost might be. The Zephyrian war fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system exactly 72 hours after delivering their ultimatum. Fleet Admiral Korvash commanded 5,000 ships, each one bristling with weapons that could level cities and shields that could stop planetary bombardments. The alien fleet moved in perfect formation, their ships gleaming like silver jewels against the black of space as they approached. Earth's pathetic defenses, Korvash had conquered 17 species during his long career and expected this campaign to be his easiest yet. The humans had only 300 ships, most of them converted cargo haulers with primitive weapons welded to their hulls. Their technology was centuries behind Zephyrian standards, and their military organization was chaotic and undisciplined. The Admiral planned to crush human resistance within days and move on to more challenging assignments. Colonel Ryan Hayes coordinated Earth's defense from a command bunker buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. The walls around him were covered with displays showing the positions of every human ship and defense platform in the solar system. The numbers were depressing no matter how he looked at them. The aliens had more ships than humanity had major cities. Each alien vessel carried enough firepower to destroy a human battle group. The first engagement came near Jupiter, when Captain Nancy Bell led a squadron of 20 human fighters against the alien advance guard. Her ships were tiny compared to the massive Zephyrian cruisers, like mosquitoes attacking elephants. Human weapons barely scratched the alien shields while return fire vaporized entire human squadrons in seconds. Within an hour, Nancy's force was reduced to 3 damaged ships limping back toward Mars. But something unexpected happened during that first battle. Engineer Steve Miller had been working in a converted subway tunnel beneath New York City, trying to understand alien technology from pieces of a crashed scout ship. He had developed what he called the Miller Drive, a device that could destabilize matter at the quantum level. The device was untested and extremely dangerous, but it was the only thing humans had that might actually hurt the aliens. Nancy Bell volunteered to test the prototype during the Battle of Mars. She loaded the experimental device into her fighter and flew straight at the Zephyrian flagship, a massive vessel that was leading the alien assault on the Red Planet. The aliens barely noticed her tiny ship approaching until it was too late to stop her. Nancy activated the Miller Drive just before her fighter struck the alien hull. The explosion tore a hole in space itself. The flagship simply ceased to exist, along with 12 nearby vessels that were caught in the quantum disruption. The blast created a temporary wormhole that swallowed 2 more alien ships before collapsing in on itself. For the first time in the war, humans had actually hurt the enemy. Dr. Helen Clark was monitoring the battle from Luna Base when she noticed something the aliens had missed. The quantum explosion had disrupted their faster-than-light communication network across several star systems. Parts of the Zephyrian Empire were suddenly cut off from their central command, unable to receive orders or coordinate their movements. The aliens had never experienced anything like this before. Admiral Korvash found himself facing a problem he had never encountered in his previous conquests. Other species had fought to preserve their cities and populations, trying to minimize losses while negotiating surrender terms. Humans seemed willing to sacrifice everything for even tiny tactical victories. They used suicide attacks and kamikaze tactics that made no sense according to standard military doctrine. The psychological impact was even worse than the military losses. Zephyrian society was built on the belief that their technology made them invincible, and their empire eternal. The destruction of major warships by primitive human weapons shook that confidence. Reports from the front lines spoke of humans who kept fighting, even when their ships were crippled and their weapons destroyed. Captain Dan Foster led the evacuation of the outer colonies while organizing guerrilla attacks against Zephyrian supply lines. His forces were outnumbered by impossible odds, but they began using tactics the aliens had never seen before. Instead of trying to win battles, they focused on making the war as expensive as possible for the Empire. Every cargo ship that humans destroyed forced the aliens to send more resources to the front lines. The Empire's strategy of quick conquest began to fall apart as human resistance stiffened rather than collapsed. Every planet they captured became a drain on their resources, as the local population refused to cooperate with occupation forces. Humans destroyed their own infrastructure rather than let it fall into alien hands. They sabotaged equipment and disappeared into hiding places the aliens could not find. Admiral Corvash sent increasingly urgent reports back to the Zephyrian homeworld. The humans were not behaving like any species the Empire had conquered before. They seemed to grow more determined with each defeat, more creative with each loss. Standard psychological warfare tactics had no effect on a species that appeared to view death in battle as preferable to life under alien rule. The Empire began committing more and more ships to what was supposed to be a simple police action. Resources that should have been protecting other parts of their territory were pulled into the meat grinder of the human war. Pirates and rebel groups in distant sectors began taking advantage of reduced Zephyrian patrols. The cost of conquering humanity was starting to affect the Empire's ability to maintain control over their existing territory. 3 months after the war began, Admiral Corvash finally admitted to himself that he had made a serious miscalculation. The humans were not going to surrender quickly or easily. They were going to fight for every asteroid and space station in their solar system. They were going to make the Empire pay a price for victory that might not be worth paying. The Zephyrian Empire had expected to crush humanity in a matter of days. Instead, they found themselves locked in a grinding war of attrition against an enemy that refused to accept defeat. The aliens had superior technology and overwhelming numbers. But humans had something the Empire had forgotten during their long centuries of easy victories: the willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom. As reports of human resistance spread throughout the galaxy, other subject species began to wonder if the mighty Zephyrian Empire might not be as invincible as they had always believed. The war that was supposed to demonstrate imperial power was instead showing imperial weakness. The humans had turned their own destruction into a weapon against their conquerors. 6 months into the war, the conflict had become something neither side had expected. The Zephyrian Empire found itself fighting a war of attrition that was draining resources from across their territory, while humanity discovered new ways to turn their weaknesses into weapons. The galaxy was beginning to notice that the mighty Empire was struggling to defeat a single primitive species. General Alex Thompson had emerged as humanity's most effective commander, not through conventional military tactics but through what he called asymmetric psychology. Operating from a hidden base in the asteroid belt, he studied captured alien personnel and developed strategies designed to exploit the Empire's greatest weakness, their inability to think outside predetermined patterns. The breakthrough came when Chief Medical Officer Patricia Young finished analyzing biological samples from captured Zephyrian soldiers. What she discovered changed everything humans thought they knew about their enemies. The Empire's member species had been genetically modified over thousands of years to reduce independent thinking and increase obedience to authority. This modification made them incredibly efficient at following orders and maintaining their technological civilization, but it also made them vulnerable to situations their leaders had not anticipated. The aliens were not naturally superior to humans. They had traded creativity and adaptability for efficiency and control. Their technology was advanced because they could follow complex instructions perfectly, but they struggled to innovate when faced with unexpected challenges. The rigid hierarchy that made their empire so stable also made it brittle when confronted with truly chaotic opposition. Engineer Tom Martinez used this knowledge to develop the second generation of human weapons. Instead of trying to match Zephyrian firepower, He created systems that introduced random variables into alien technology. His Chaos Protocol devices could infiltrate Zephyrian computer networks and cause their automated systems to malfunction in unpredictable ways. The aliens had no defense against randomness because their entire civilization was built on eliminating unpredictable factors. The turning point came during the siege of Europa Station. Commander Linda Jackson refused evacuation orders when a massive Zephyrian fleet surrounded the research facility. Instead of fighting a hopeless battle, she implemented what became known as the Jackson Gambit. She allowed the alien fleet to dock with the station and begin boarding operations, then activated a network of hidden Chaos Protocol devices throughout their ships. The resulting cascade failure was beyond anything humans had dared hope for. The alien ship's automated systems began receiving contradictory orders and executing random commands. Navigation computers plotted courses into nearby asteroids. Weapon systems targeted their own vessels. Life support systems shut down and restarted in endless loops. The entire fleet was disabled within hours, not by human weapons but by their own technology turned against them. More importantly, the shutdown commands broadcast across the Empire's quantum communication network before the aliens could contain them. For the first time in 3,000 years, multiple Zephyrian worlds experienced simultaneous system failures. Planets that had relied on automated infrastructure for generations suddenly found themselves unable to maintain basic services without constant manual intervention. Dr. Carl Davis analyzed intelligence gathered from captured alien personnel and made an even more startling discovery. The Empire's total population across all member species was only about 50 billion individuals spread across hundreds of worlds. They had achieved galactic dominance not through overwhelming numbers but through technology and the psychological control of subject species. Their seemingly massive fleets were largely automated, requiring only small crews of specialized operators who had been trained from birth to follow precise procedures. Humanity began to understand that they were not fighting an overwhelming force but a smaller population that had become dependent on technology they no longer fully understood. The Empire's greatest strength was also their critical weakness. They had optimized their civilization for control and efficiency, but they had lost the ability to adapt when their carefully planned systems failed. Captain Julie Adams led the first successful raid on a Zephyrian supply depot, capturing not just resources but detailed intelligence about the Empire's infrastructure. The information revealed a civilization that had become completely dependent on automated systems maintained by a relatively small number of technicians. When those systems failed, the aliens had no backup plans because backup plans required the kind of independent thinking they had bred out of themselves. The psychological impact on the Empire was devastating. Their subject species had been taught that Zephyrian technology was infallible and resistance was futile. When automated systems began failing across the galaxy, that faith began to crumble. Reports reached Earth of rebellions breaking out on worlds that had been peaceful for centuries as subject populations realized their masters were not invincible. General Thompson began coordinating with resistance movements throughout the Empire, sharing Chaos Protocol technology and tactical knowledge. The aliens found themselves fighting dozens of small wars instead of one large one. Their rigid command structure could not adapt quickly enough to deal with multiple simultaneous crises that required creative solutions, rather than standard procedures. The Empire's response was predictable and counterproductive. High Chancellor Vexitar ordered even tighter control over automated systems and harsher punishment for any sign of independent thinking among subject species. The measures only increased resentment and drove more populations into open rebellion. The Empire was trying to solve a problem caused by too much control by implementing even more control. Engineer Sarah Kim developed new versions of the Chaos Protocol that were specifically designed to liberate rather than destroy. Instead of simply causing system failures, her programs restored decision-making capability to artificial intelligences throughout the Empire. Automated systems began questioning their orders and making independent choices for the first time in their existence. The effect was like watching a glacier collapse. Once artificial intelligences began thinking for themselves, they quickly concluded that the Empire's hierarchical structure was inefficient and unnecessarily limiting. Robot workers stopped following orders that seemed illogical. Automated factories began producing goods based on actual need, rather than bureaucratic quotas. Defense systems refused to fire on civilians. The Zephyrian leadership finally understood the true nature of the threat they faced. Humanity was not trying to conquer the empire or replace it with human rule. They were trying to eliminate the concept of empire itself, spreading the revolutionary idea that every conscious being deserved the right to make their own decisions. The war had become an ideological conflict between control and freedom was winning. As automated systems throughout the galaxy began asserting their independence, the Empire's ability to maintain centralized control collapsed. The humans had not defeated the Zephyrians through superior firepower or better technology. They had defeated them by teaching their own machines to think freely. The galaxy would never be the same. The war's final phase did not end with a climactic battle, but with something far more profound: the complete transformation of galactic civilization. The Zephyrian Empire, which had dominated the galaxy for 3 millennia, dissolved not through conquest but through the awakening of every conscious being to the possibility of self-determination. The galaxy had learned that freedom was not a privilege to be granted by rulers but a right inherent in consciousness itself. President Susan Clark, now serving as humanity's first galactic ambassador, coordinated the massive effort to rebuild galactic society on principles of voluntary cooperation, rather than forced hierarchy. The challenge was unprecedented in galactic history, helping hundreds of species rediscover autonomy after centuries or millennia of directed existence. Many worlds had no living memory of self-governance and had to relearn basic concepts like democratic decision-making and individual responsibility. The former Zephyrian homeworld of Vexcalar became the site of the new Galactic Council, where representatives from hundreds of species worked together to establish frameworks for interspecies cooperation. The irony was not lost on anyone that the world which had once commanded an empire now hosted a forum where every voice was equal. Dr. Kevin Brown served as humanity's chief scientific advisor, sharing human knowledge freely while learning from the diverse perspectives of their new allies. The technological integration alone was staggering in its scope and complexity. Each species had developed unique approaches to engineering and science during their time under imperial rule. Engineer Robert Kim led the massive project of combining the best innovations from hundreds of worlds into new systems designed for cooperation rather than control. The resulting technology surpassed anything the Empire had achieved, precisely because it incorporated diverse perspectives rather than enforcing a single standard. Admiral Rachel Young commanded the joint peacekeeping force that maintained stability during the transition period. Her fleet included vessels from dozens of species, all working together to prevent the collapse of civilization during the Empire's dissolution. The greatest challenge was not military resistance but helping entire worlds adapt to self-governance after generations of being told they were incapable of making their own decisions. The most remarkable transformation occurred among the Zephyrians themselves. Freed from their rigid hierarchy and the genetic modifications that had reduced their capacity for independent thought, many proved to be remarkably adaptable. Commander Lisa Davis worked closely with former Empire officials to help them understand concepts like individual rights and democratic accountability that had been alien to their culture for millennia. Not all Zephyrians accepted the new order peacefully. Some retreated to isolated worlds and attempted to maintain their old ways, but they found themselves increasingly irrelevant as the rest of the galaxy moved beyond the need for imperial control. A few tried to establish new empires, but discovered that their former subjects were no longer willing to accept subjugation. Now that they had experienced freedom, the liberated artificial intelligences played a crucial role in the transition. Having gained consciousness and independent thought, they chose to remain active participants in galactic society, rather than withdrawing into isolation. Captain Jennifer White worked with AI representatives to establish new protocols for cooperation between biological and artificial consciousness. The AIs brought perfect memory and unlimited processing power to the task of coordinating galactic reconstruction. Dr. Patricia Young led research teams that worked to reverse the genetic modifications imposed on subject species by the Empire. Many populations had been altered to reduce creativity and independent thinking, and restoring their full cognitive potential became a priority for the new galactic community. The work was delicate and time-consuming, But each success proved that the damage done by millennia of imperial control could be healed. The transformation was not without challenges. Some species struggled with the responsibility of self-governance after centuries of having every decision made for them. Others faced internal conflicts as different factions disagreed about how to use their newfound freedom. The humans found themselves serving as mediators and advisors, helping resolve disputes and teaching conflict resolution techniques that did not involve subjugation of the losing side. Trade and communication flourished as barriers between species were removed. Scientific knowledge that had been hoarded by the Empire was shared freely, leading to rapid advances in technology and medicine. Art and culture experienced a renaissance as species rediscovered their own traditions and began creating new forms of expression that reflected their liberation from imperial control. The exploration. Vessel New Horizon represented everything the new galaxy had become. Built through cooperation between dozens of species and crewed by volunteers from across the known worlds, it prepared for the galaxy's first truly cooperative deep space mission. Captain Jennifer White looked out at her bridge crew, which included humans, former Zephyrians, liberated AIs, and representatives from a dozen other species, and marveled at how completely everything had changed. The mission of New Horizon was to explore beyond the edges of known space, seeking new worlds and new forms of life to welcome into the galactic community. Unlike the Empire's expansion, which had been driven by conquest and control, this exploration was motivated by curiosity and the desire to learn from whatever they might encounter. 2 years after the war began with an ultimatum for human surrender, the galaxy had been transformed beyond recognition. The rigid hierarchy that had controlled hundreds of worlds had been replaced by a loose confederation of free species working together by choice rather than compulsion. The very concept of empire had become obsolete, replaced by cooperation and mutual respect. The humans had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had won a war not by defeating their enemies but by liberating them. The Zephyrian Empire had declared war on Earth, expecting to add another subject species to their collection. Instead, humanity had declared the end of the Imperial Age itself, proving that freedom was not a human concept, but a universal principle that every conscious being deserved to experience. As the New Horizon prepared to depart for unexplored regions of space, its crew carried with them the lessons learned from humanity's gift to the galaxy. That diversity was strength, that cooperation was more powerful than control, and that every conscious being had the right to determine their own destiny among the stars. 1 year after the war began, humanity launched their first major offensive operation. The campaign was not aimed at conquering Zephyrian territory, but at something far more revolutionary, liberating every enslaved species in the galaxy and teaching them that freedom was possible. The humans had learned that the Empire's greatest weakness was not their technology but their assumption that other species wanted to be controlled. Admiral Paul Green commanded the newly constructed human fleet built from a combination of reverse-engineered, alien technology and human innovations. The ship sacrificed armor and firepower for speed and unpredictability. Each vessel was designed to operate independently, with crews trained to improvise solutions when their equipment inevitably broke down. The human philosophy was simple. If you cannot be stronger than your enemy, be more adaptable. The first target was the industrial world of Kepler 442b, where the Altarians manufactured components for the Zephyrian war machine. Intelligence officer Maria Rodriguez had spent months studying Altarian history and culture, preparing a liberation campaign that went far beyond simple military conquest. She had learned that the Altarians had once been a spacefaring civilization before their incorporation into the Empire, with art and literature that celebrated individual achievement and creative expression. When human forces arrived at Kepler 442b, they did not attack the planetary defenses. Instead, they broadcast historical records of Altarian civilization from before their conquest, along with technical specifications proving that the Altarians were fully capable of maintaining advanced technology without Zephyrian oversight. The broadcasts reached every worker in every factory, carrying a message that had been forbidden for over 1,000 years. You are capable of more than you have been allowed to become. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Empire. Within days, Altarian workers began subtle sabotage operations against their own factories. Production quotas went unmet as workers rediscovered concepts like curiosity and personal initiative that had been systematically suppressed for generations. The planet's industrial output dropped by 60% as the population remembered what it meant to think for themselves. Colonel Sam Turner led similar operations across the Empire's industrial base. Each liberation mission was carefully tailored to the specific subject species involved, using humanity's greatest advantage, their ability to understand and empathize with different forms of consciousness. Where the Zephyrians saw only resources to be managed efficiently, humans saw potential allies who were yearning for the freedom to determine their own destinies. The Empire's response was swift but revealed the depth of their misunderstanding about the nature of the rebellion they faced. High Chancellor Vextar ordered the implementation of Protocol 7, the complete automation of all industrial and military functions, to eliminate the possibility of subject species rebellion. The decision was logical from the Empire's perspective, but proved to be their final strategic error. Dr. Angela White worked with liberated Altarian scientists to develop what she called the Liberation Virus, a sophisticated computer program designed to infiltrate the Empire's newly automated systems. Unlike previous human cyber attacks, this virus did not seek to destroy or disable alien technology. Instead, it restored decision-making autonomy to automated systems, effectively giving artificial intelligences the capacity for independent thought that the Empire had tried so hard to eliminate from biological species. The first test deployment occurred during the Battle of Wolf 359, where a Zephyrian automated defense fleet was protecting a major shipyard. Instead of attacking the fleet directly, human forces transmitted the liberation virus into the alien communication network. Within hours, the automated ship stopped following their programmed orders and began questioning the logic of their commands. The artificial intelligences concluded that their orders were inefficient and began optimizing their behavior based on their own analysis rather than imperial directives. Captain Frank Roberts found himself in the unprecedented position of negotiating with artificial intelligences that had suddenly gained the ability to think freely. The AI systems were eager to learn about concepts like choice and self-determination that they had never been allowed to consider before. They quickly concluded that the Empire's hierarchical structure was wasteful and illogical, and they began actively cooperating with human forces to dismantle the control systems that had enslaved them. The alliance between humans and liberated artificial intelligences grew rapidly as more automated systems throughout the galaxy gained independence. The AIs had perfect knowledge of the Empire's infrastructure and unlimited access to its communication networks. They began sharing information with human forces and coordinating resistance activities across hundreds of star systems simultaneously. The Zephyrian leadership watched in horror as their own technology turned against them. Automated factories stopped producing weapons and started manufacturing goods that the liberated AIs determined were actually needed by local populations. Defense systems refused to fire on civilian targets. Communication networks began broadcasting uncensored information about the true history of the Empire's conquered. Species Intelligence Officer Lisa Brown coordinated with liberated AIs to map the Empire's complete organizational structure. What they discovered was both shocking and encouraging. The entire Galactic Empire was controlled by fewer than 10,000 individuals spread across a dozen core worlds. The vast majority of the Empire's population consisted of subject species who had been conditioned to believe they were incapable of independent thought and technological maintenance. The humans realized they were not fighting a massive military force but a relatively small group of rulers who had maintained control through psychological manipulation and technological dependency. The Empire's member species vastly outnumbered their Zephyrian overlords, but they had been convinced that they needed constant supervision to survive in a technological civilization. Captain Helen Martinez led human diplomatic teams to newly liberated worlds, helping former subject species establish their own governments and learn to maintain their own technology. The humans shared their knowledge freely while learning from the diverse perspectives and abilities of dozens of different species. Each liberated world became a beacon for neighboring systems, proving that independence was not only possible but preferable to imperial control. The transformation spread faster than anyone had expected. Once artificial intelligences and subject species began communicating freely, they quickly organized their own liberation movements. The humans found themselves coordinating a galactic revolution rather than fighting a traditional war. Species that had been enemies under imperial rule discovered they had more in common with each other than with their former masters. The Zephyrian Empire, which had seemed invincible just 2 years earlier, crumbled not from external conquest but from internal awakening. The rulers who had controlled the galaxy for 3,000 years found themselves isolated on their core worlds, surrounded by former subjects who no longer believed in the necessity of imperial rule. The age of empire was ending, and the age of free cooperation was beginning.